apparent. So then Sheikh al-Fawzan continues, and he goes on to make mention of it. There's a very nice paragraph here, in fact, that Sheikh al-Fawzan mentioned. So I'll read through it and translate it and explain. So he says, وَإِذَا فَقَدَ الْعَبْدُ الطُّمْأَنِينَ وَالْأُنْسِ بِاللَّهِ فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يُحَقِّقْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. So as a consequence of all of this discussion, when a servant, he loses being tranquil with Allah and having this friendship with Allah, right? Because this is what you are supposed to achieve, right? By being in servitude to Allah, because the love of Allah is more than any other love. So therefore you are now in servitude to Allah. That servitude now brings you, it should bring you, if Allah is the one whom you're seeking, right? It should bring you this serenity and tranquility and friendship, right? If this is lost, if you don't find it, if you don't have it, and if you aren't tranquil and at ease and at peace and calm in your life, right, and you're free from all of those like anxieties and things like that, if you're not tranquil, then you haven't really actualized the reality of La ilaha illallah, right? And in fact here, also like sometimes you often come across people with like this question always comes up about mental health issues, mental health problems, anxiety, stress, whatever. And a lot of the time people ask, how can we treat this? What is the medication? What is the nutrition? What is the this? What is the that? Can we go to this? Can we go to a non-Muslim, consultant, or there's a, is it consultant, or there's a counselor, things like that. And ultimately, all of these things always return back to, obviously it comes down to weakness in Iman, first and foremost, the weakness in Iman in Allah, His angels, His books, His messengers, al-Qada wal-Qadar, understanding al-Qada wal-Qadar as well, particularly, and the last day. There's a weakness in that knowledge there, because that firm foundation of Iman will make sure that when a believer, he encounters like trauma, like an emotional trauma or a difficult situation in his life, then that strong Iman should allow him to correctly frame and understand that particular trauma, right? And to see it in the right way, right? And the reason why mental illness arises is because that trauma or that shock or that experience that person has, it's wrongly framed in his mind, right? And he's unable to resolve it and think it through and resolve it, and for it to pass through his mind as something that's been resolved, right? And so therefore it sticks and lodges in his mind, and he can't get out of it or get over it, and so it stays in his mind. That trauma is there, and then all the other things start following on from it as well, right? So you keep thinking about it, and then the waswasa can come in, the whispering from the shayateen, and it becomes lodged in your mind, and you can't really process it and get it out of your system, right? So a lot of these things, like when you don't have al-tum'anina, al-raha, al-surur, al-ladha, these are like pleasure and serenity and calmness and tranquility, and you're content with life, and you're able to deal with things that come your way. It's because there's multiple reasons. I mean, what I've mentioned here is just like the foundation of it all, which is a weakness in the pillars of Iman and the details of those pillars. Because obviously we know that everybody knows, belief in Allah, angels, books, messengers, al-Qada wal-Qadr, and the last day. Everybody has this knowledge, but it's because of a lack of the details, right? The specific details in all these things and how they affect a person in his personality, in his outlook. All of these have an effect upon you, right? Yawmul Qiyamah, there's going to be absolute justice. So if somebody has wronged you in this life, well, you trust in Allah, justice will be done. Right? You don't need to become angry and upset and, caught up in something. That gives you certainty that justice will be done and the criminal or whoever it is will be brought to justice. Right? So there's no, right? So each of these pillars of Iman, Allah, the books, the messengers, the angels, and especially Al-Qada wal-Qadar, right? Understanding Al-Qada wal-Qadar, this is one of the very important things to understand that helps, with these types of things. So the point being that if you do not have tranquility, happiness, you're just miserable and unhappy and stress, anxiety, this, that, whatever, it's often because you've encountered certain things in your life, stressful things, trauma, emotional trauma, loss or whatever, and you've not responded to it in the right way upon firm Iman in Allah Azza wa Jal, and that's kind of lodged itself somewhere in your heart, in your mind, and it's not being taken out, right? And the way that it's taken out is by these kind of issues, by Iman, tawakkul, reliance, thinking it through, resolving it, framing it in the right way, and obviously counseling is part and parcel of this. You seek counseling from a Muslim, from a person of Tawheed, Sunnah Muslim, not from, because when you go to non-Muslim counselors, it's just purely materialistic, it's just, there's no, I'm not saying that it can't be of benefit, but it's lacking the essence of the solution or the cure. So when the servant doesn't have الطمأنينة والأنس بالله فإنه لم يحقق لا إله إلا الله. When the servant does not have tranquility and happiness, then he has not actualized لا إله إلا الله, meaning there's some deficiency there. Then he says لأن معنى لا إله إلا الله, because the meaning of لا إله إلا الله is لا معبود بحق إلا الله سبحانه وتعالى. There is no deity worshipped in truth except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? There is nothing that is worshipped in truth except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the meaning of ilah, what is the meaning of a deity, ilah? Its meaning is al-mahbub. Al-mahbub. We've already covered this before, right? We said al-mahabba is the foundation of worship. And the word ilah, what is the meaning of ilah? Ilah is al-ma'bud, the one worshipped, al-mahbub, the one who is loved. You only worship the one who is loved. And Allah, al-ilah, ilah, is one who is mahbub, the one who is loved, right? So worshipping Allah is that, as he says, وَعِبَادَةُ اللَّهِ هي التي يحصل بها الطمأنينة والراحة واللذة والسرور والصبر والاحتساب والثبات. Worshipping Allah is that by which tranquility, ease, like al-ladha, which means like delight, you taste the deliciousness of it, as-surur, happiness, as-sabr, patience, al-ihtisab, where you're able to anticipate reward, right? Al-thabat, firmness, right? All these things are acquired by way of the worship of Allah. وَمَعْنَى لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ لَا مَعْبُودْ بِحَقٍّ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. So the meaning of La ilaha illallah is that nothing is worshipped in truth except Allah. In other words, only the worship of Allah is true. It is truth. If you worship an idol, that worship is false. If you worship a cat, that worship is false. If you worship a monkey, that worship is false. If you worship Isa alayhi salam, that worship is false. Right? That's futility. Only the worship of Allah is true, is haqq and sidq. It is true. And and then he says, and every deity that is besides Allah, then worshipping it is futile. It is false. وَكُلُّ مَعْبُودٍ سِوَى اللَّهِ فَعِبَادَتُهُ بَاطِلَةٌ. Every deity worshipped besides Allah, then its worship is false. And this is because لأن هناك معبودات غير الله, there are many deities besides Allah, وآلهة غير الله, many deities besides Allah, ولكن كلها باطلة وكلها باطل وكلها حسرة على أصحابها. And these deities will be ruin and loss upon the ones who worship them. وكلها يوم القيامة يكون بينها وبين عابديها بغض وبراءة وتحسر كما ذكر الله ذلك. And so these things which are worshipped besides Allah on the Day of Judgment, those worshipped and the worshippers, there's going to be hatred between them. They're going to free themselves from each other, and there's going to be ruin and loss between them, right? So everything which is worshipped besides Allah Azza wa Jal, they will be in dispute, they will be arguing with their worshippers, and the worshippers will be arguing with those whom they worshipped. You are the ones who misguided us. That's what they're going to say. You misguided us. Oh Allah, multiply their punishment because they misguided us. And they're going to say, we are free from you, what you worshipped. We've got nothing to do with you. Right? So they're going to try and free themselves from those, and those are going to say, put the blame on those. Right? This debate and argument between the mushrik and the one whom they shared in Allah's worship, this is a reality that has been mentioned numerous times in the Quran. And وَأَنَّهُ يَلْعَنُ بَعْدُهُمْ بَعْدًا, and some of them will curse the others. They will say, oh Allah, curse them, because for misguiding them. Right? All of this is going to take place. And he continues and he says, فَكُلُّ هَذَا يَزُولُ وَلَا يَبْقَى إِلَّا اللَّهَ وَمَا أُرِيدَ بِهِ وَجْهُهُ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى. So all of this, everything else will cease and come to an end, and nothing will remain except Allah and whatever was sought. His face was sought by way of it. Right? Whatever his face was sought by way of it, only that will remain. Allah will remain, and whatever was for his face. Everything else from the dunya will perish. All material possessions, all your relationships, all between mother, father, mother, husband, wife, father, son, father, right? All intimate friendships, all that will come to an end, except what was for the sake of Allah, which obviously is the sincere and the righteous deeds. So he says, فَالْمُسْلِمْ يَعْرِفُ ذَلِكَ. The Muslim is the one who knows this. وَيَعْرِفُ ثَمْرَةَ الْعِبَادَةِ. A Muslim also knows the fruits of worship. فَالْعِبَادَةِ لَيْسَتْ عَادَةٌ مِنَ الْعَادَاتِ. Because worship isn't just like a habit. It's not like a tradition. It's not something that you just blindly أو تقليدا من التقاليد كما يقول الذين لا يجدون لذة العبادة ولا فائدتها. Right? So worship isn't just like it's like a custom or a tradition that you follow, or something that you blindly, like a tradition that you follow, which is said by some people. There are many people who think that ibadah is just like a ritual. You just go and you just ritually just do what you're supposed to do, like rote repetition, and that's all it is. These people see it like that, but this is not so. Rather, worship itself, بل العبادة نعمة عظيمة. Worship is actually a tremendous bounty. A believer actually finds tranquility by way of it in his life, right? So for example, when you pray, when you do dhikr, when you remember Allah, sit there, you remember Allah, His names, and tahleel, tahmeed, tasbih, whatever. And when you pray, when you make dua, and when you do, the act of worship, that actually brings you tranquility, pleasure, right? It's not just a ritual, rote repetition, as is claimed by people who basically find worship to be a burden, right? There are many, you find this among Muslims, it's just a burden for them. Jum'ah is a burden, the prayer is a burden. Like, this is like, it's a hardship. I've got to do it, and I'll do it to follow the traditions, but they don't actually find any love, they don't find any benefit or taste out of it, or tranquility out of it. Whereas, the believer, he sees it as a tremendous bounty, and he actually finds actual tranquility from it or through it in his life. And then because of this, because ibadah has an actual, tangible, real benefit upon a person and his heart and his mind and his soul, and he actually benefits from it. It's not just a blind rote tradition that you follow without any meaning, right? Because you actually benefit from it. And obviously this is how, like, you see the atheists and people like that. They say, oh, these are you just blindly doing this prostration and bowing, meaningless, empty, of no benefit. It's just a tradition passed on that you're just blindly following, and but this is false, because we find, and in fact this goes back to the same point that we mentioned in the previous lessons, that you find that those who are the most pessimistic and the ones who take their lives the most are the atheists, the atheistic nations, where they don't have any belief in anything. Everything is just, it's like nihilism, which is the idea that everything's going to perish and there's nothing of meaning anyway. So, you might as well just go and do as you please and do as you want, and whatever gives you tranquility, whatever gives you peace, invent your own ideology, invent your own philosophy of life, and just pursue whatever is your truth, and right? So even if that means, raping children and doing whatever, right? Then that's your, that's your truth, and that's your whatever, and so what happens ultimately? They never get pleasure, satisfaction, serenity, calmness, and then when they realize that the life is just utterly, completely meaningless, right? And like we said before, that when they come to realize that, well, according to my belief, what I believe in, the materialism and Darwinism and all the rest of it, my life is as meaningful as the dog's feces on the floor. Right? There's no difference between the meaningfulness of either of these two things. A lot of these people, they sit there and they philosophically think about all of this, and when it hits them like, that's the truth, then many of them basically they enter into this utter pessimism, like you're very pessimistic about everything. Everything is negative, everything is this, everything is that. Right? And that's why when you look at these philosophers in history, like the great philosophers, the European philosophers, like your Nietzsche's and these people like that, who said God is dead and whatever, you find that they were the most miserable, despicable, unhappy, filthy, vile people on the face of this earth. Right? And so, whereas for us, the believers, when we are worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal, this is something meaningful. It is the truth, and it brings you actual tangible benefit. Right? You actually benefit from worship, dhikr, dua, sabr, isti'ana, isti'adha. Right? All of this actually brings you benefit, and that's why the people of the earth who are the strongest in facing the trials of life are the Muslims and the people of Tawheed. How many times have you seen, like we know from many narrations from the Salaf, like one of the companions, or from the Salaf, his son dies and he starts laughing, in acceptance of the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal, laughing out of the pleasure of the decree of Allah. You see earthquakes happening in Muslim countries, and people coming out and being, grateful to Allah Azza wa Jal in pleasure. You don't see this with any other nation, any other people, any other, So here, he says, بَلِ الْعِبَادَةِ نِعْمَةٌ عَظِيمَةٌ. Worship is a tremendous bounty. يَرْتَاحُ بِهَا الْمُؤْمِنِ فِي حَيَاتِهِ. A believer finds he's at ease and tranquil in his life by way of this worship. فَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ سَرَّاء شَكَرَ اللَّهِ. If some happiness or something good comes to him, he's grateful to Allah. وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ ضَرَّاء صَبَرَ احْتِسَابًا لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. And if any hardship afflicts him, then he is patient, expecting reward, doing it for the face of Allah and anticipating reward. And so therefore, the events and the downturns and the hardships and whatever happens do not they don't affect him like, the ones that come upon people. He's not really swayed or moved by those things, because he لأنه واثق بالله عز وجل وأنه لن يصيبه شيء إلا من صالحه, that he will not be afflicted by anything except for that which is for his benefit. Right? So believer knows and recognizes this, that he knows that nothing is going to come to him except that which is in his interest and which is for his benefit. And either it is to purify him of his sins, or it is to increase him in righteous deeds, or as a sign for him to make tawbah, so he makes tawbah. Right? So in other words, when a believer is faced with a calamity, he knows that this has come to me, and there's only three options for me. There's only three things for me. One, this is a chunk of my sins removed, alhamdulillah, or it is my righteous deeds increased because of my patience, or it is a notification for me to actually repent. Right? And he should be happy that it came to him now before Allah takes his soul. So the fact that this calamity has come to me and I'm not dead, this is a tremendous bounty for me to, it's a tanbih, it's like a notification from Allah that he should repent. So this is a tremendous little paragraph from Shaykh al-Fawzan, hafidhahullah ta'ala. And what we'll do, inshallah, we'll stop at this point today, inshallah. We'll stop the lesson here, and we'll continue with the discussion continues on the same point on ibadah and isti'anah, and making tawakkul upon Allah, seeking aid from Allah. This discussion continues. We'll leave it at this point, and inshallah ta'ala we'll continue that in the next lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.